Hello and welcome to Rippercast, your podcast on Jack the Ripper and the Whitechapel murders. This is episode 8. The medium is the message, with Stephen P. Ryder. Originally released on April 6th, 2008.
Joining me today in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is Howard Brown. Hi, Howard.
How you doing, John? Glad to be here as always, buddy.
Glad to have you here. And in Hull is Mike Covell.
Hi, Jonathan. It's always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to have you also. And in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada is Robert McLaughlin. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Jonathan. Great to be here.
Good to have you. And joining us today in St. Louis, Missouri is Andrew Spalek.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Andy. Glad you could be here with us today. And also from Kent in the UK is Paul Begg. Hello, Paul.
Hi. It's good to be with such illustrious company.
Oh, thank you very much. Paul, in case you don't know, is a ripperologist and author of numerous books, including Jack the Ripper, The Facts, Jack the Ripper, The Definitive History, Jack the Ripper, A to Z, with Martin Fido and Keith Skinner, and a new edition of which will hopefully be released in the near future. And our special guest today is the editor of the online research website Casebook Jack the Ripper, as well as the administrator of their message boards, and editor of the 2006 book Public Reactions to Jack the Ripper, Letters to the Editor, August to December 1888, published by Inklings Press. He's coming to us from Charlottesville, Virginia, Stephen P. Ryder. Hello, Stephen.
Hello.
And we're very happy to have you as a guest on today's show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'll start things off, Stephen, by asking you what first piqued your interest in the Jack the Ripper case. When did it all begin for you?
I suppose if we're going back to the beginning, I first got interested probably in high school. I seem to remember doing a paper on, not necessarily Jack the Ripper on its own, but serial killers in general. And I guess my oldest memory is, like a lot of other people, is the Mary Kelly photograph, probably from Donald Rumbelow's book. I didn't really do much with it after that. I spent a few years and went to college, and at about the same time that I discovered the internet, I discovered the Diary of Jack the Ripper, which at the time sounded fascinating and interesting, and so I picked up a copy of that and read that, and had some discussions with some friends of mine on the subject, and just sort of started putting my thoughts down on paper about the diary and about the case in general. And from there, as I said, this is about the same time that I was first fiddling around with this new thing called the internet in about 1995, and got in touch with a fellow who had a small Ripper online Jack the Ripper game. His name was Mark Dooling, and just told him I had some articles that I thought I might like to post on a website, and I had no idea how to do that, so I sent them to him, and he was kind enough to post it on his site. And I guess from there it was sort of startling, the response that came in from those articles, because back then there was so little available on the web. And actually, one of the first people to write to me, and at the time I was tickled pink, I couldn't believe it, was the man who's with us today, is Paul Begg. And he wrote me an email probably within the first few weeks of getting those initial articles online, the sort of nugget that would eventually become the casebook. And of course, I knew who he was. I'd read the books, read his books at the time, and I couldn't be more amazed. I was like, wow, there's this published author writing and commenting on these articles that I just threw together. And so this, along with all the other feedback I was getting, just got me very excited. And I guess I kept reading more and writing more, and eventually those few articles became a site on its own. And that's really how the casebook got started. That was late 1995, early 1996, and eventually we got our own site, got our own domain name and everything, and the rest is history. And that was, a little bit over 12 years ago.
was your background in literature or in English or in writing, or what was your educational background that caused you to want to write a lot about the Jack the Ripper case?
Well, at the time, I was an English major. That lasted, I think, about a year and a half. I actually couldn't get through Shakespeare. That was I couldn't deal with it. So I switched from English to anthropology. But yeah, I guess I did have something of a writing background. As a freshman in college, it wasn't much. Yeah. So that was at the time I did have an English major.
And how did the casebook.org website get started? I mean, there are a lot of us that weren't around to visit the site 12 years ago, so what was it? To kind of explain the process that went on and the initial reaction to the site, and stuff about the early history of the website.
Well, the early history is sort of the very beginning is what I already talked about, and then after that, it was really a matter of writing about the victims, writing about the suspects, writing and transcribing press reports, which has always been sort of my main fascination when it comes to Jack the Ripper. And in the early days, there wasn't much. There was a main homepage, and then there was just maybe 6 or 10 links that went off to a total of maybe 30 or 40 or 50 pages. But what happened was, after the first few weeks and months, as I said, people were writing in, and they were not only saying, thanks for putting this up, or a nice article, or giving me feedback and complaints about things I'd missed, but there were also people who were just aching to contribute to the site. And that's what really got it off the ground and made it into something much bigger than what I just alone could have put together. And so we had people offering to write victim biographies and folks who had manuscripts at home that they always thought I might get this published one day, but they never really got to that point or decided they just wanted to give it to someone to do something with it. So a lot of people did that, and the site really, after the first 2 months or so, just really sort of exploded after then. And then, of course, we put up the message boards and the forums and the chat room and all that, and sort of the community started to snowball together and really become a sizable website.
And that it is, and today it's the place to go for information on Jack the Ripper. You have everyone from the veterans who have been researching the case since the 1960s and before, visiting your site, all the way down to what seemed like high school students posting on your message boards, seeking more information. And it's really become a research and educational tool for the case. And we all applaud you for that.
Thank you.
Howard Brown in Philadelphia, you want to take over from here?
Sure do. I have a question for Steve. How you doing, Steve?
Pretty good, and you?
All right, buddy. Let me ask you this. Of all the various mediums that Ripperology is involved in, which of them would you care to guess will become more prominent in the 21st century? For example, podcasts, magazines, websites, books, documentaries. Would you care to elaborate?
Sure. I think obviously the web is the most dynamic and is the most promising sort of new medium to come up, obviously. But I guess I'm still a traditionalist. I think books have been king and will be king for a long time to come. I think the web is great for certain things. It's great for bringing people together, and it's great for compiling information. But when you want to really sit down and read a narrative, read 200, 300, 400 pages of very well-written, very well-researched material, generally, and maybe this is just me, but I don't want to do it on a computer screen. I want to sit down and be comfortable and read it in a book. And so I think, there are those who think that the paper publishing industry is on the way out. I don't know if that's the case. I think there's certainly a shift, and some material that previously would have been published in paper format is probably going to be more and more compiled online, and vice versa. I mean, a lot of stuff that really would never have seen the light of day 15 or 20 years ago, thanks to self-publishing, which is largely an online process these days, is now actually being made and being made available in hard copy. So, I mean, I don't really have a simple answer. I think certainly anything online based is going to grow, and there's going to be probably more independently made videos, more independently made podcasts like this going down the pipe. But for me, I think it's never going to replace books and magazines, and you get that sort of tactile experience. It's going to complement it, but I don't think it's going to overtake it.
Yeah. Well, what would you say to the creation of a Ripper documentary with individuals other than the usual suspects, such as Stuart Evans and Paul Begg? One or two that would have modern hardcore Ripperologists who were weaned on the works of the aforementioned.
Yeah, I can't stand seeing Paul Begg in another documentary.
One more and I'm going nuts.
Oh.
No,
Gee, I wish I can come on now.
No, what I meant to say was a documentary that featured the work of Neil Sheldon, for example, or Chris Scott.
Yeah.
That focused on the specialist genre of Ripperology.
Yeah, I think that's a fine idea, and I think in a way it's starting to happen. A lot of people, I know Neil Sheldon was in one of the major documentaries in 2007, and I think there's always going to be sort of a turnover, or there's going to be the one generation of Ripperologists and experts, and then the next, and it's eventually everyone will get their day. And I think if you work hard enough and you know your stuff and you've made some discoveries and you have something to share, it doesn't really matter what your name is or how well you're known, as long as you have something to contribute. Certainly it's worthwhile.
Right. Well, thanks a lot, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen, it's Robert. Back in the 1990s, some old texts and some obscure texts were either too expensive or too difficult to find, and you started something called the Ripperological Preservation Society, where you found a lot of old text and reprinted them and made them available to the Ripper community. Can you talk a little bit about how that started and how you got into researching such obscure and old titles?
Sure. Well, like I said, my primary interest from the early days and through today is the contemporary press reports, which has always been sort of a fascination for me. The idea that there's literally just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them out there, and we know pretty well the content of the articles of a few dozen papers, but there's just so much out there to still be found. And that also goes along with the contemporary or near contemporary literature. My opinion on the case has always been, we're looking back, we're trying to solve a mystery, and we've got maybe 5%, if even that, of the material and the knowledge that the people had back then that were originally investigating the case. And so it seems to me that the farther back you go, the more likely it is that you'll find, actually verifiable information, something useful. And so, back when I was in college, online library directories were sort of a new and crazy thing. And of course, with my interest in Jack the Ripper, I would always be searching for Jack the Ripper and Whitechapel and all the various keywords. And I came across a book that I never saw in any of the previous bibliographies by a guy named Samuel Hudson, titled Leather Apron, or The Horrors of Whitechapel, 1888, and it looked like it was a proper book, not just an article or something ephemeral. And so I went out and I looked for a copy, and eventually I think we found it on microfilm somewhere in Indiana or Illinois. And sure enough, it was a full-length book, about just over 80 pages, if I remember. and as best as we can tell, it was actually published around December of 1888, which made it, one of the very first non-fiction titles ever published on the subject, and it was actually published in the United States, I think in Philadelphia.
It was in Philadelphia,
yeah. So that was my first, I guess, big find that, as far as I know, no one else had found it previous to that. And so I thought, why not make that available to folks to read? And that's where we started the Ripperological Preservation Society, which is an awful name, and I cringe just having to pronounce that. But so that was the first one. And from there, I kept searching and kept finding stuff, mostly some 19th century dime novels that very few people had ever seen before. And so I put those out as well. And I did that for a few years, probably about 3-4 years. And eventually I didn't really find anything else that was brand new. And by then, so many other people were looking, and so many other people were making reprints, that I didn't really feel like I was doing something that was necessarily benefiting anyone any longer. So at that point, I made most of the stuff that I had found and published available online, and really I haven't pursued it since then. But a lot of other people have been doing reprints in the UK and in the US and bringing out some really incredible stuff. I mean, there's new things being found all the time. So.
Along the same lines, want you to talk a little bit about the Casebook Press project and how that came about, and it eventually led to your book, Public Reactions to Jack the Ripper. But tell us a little bit about the history of how that got going.
Sure. Well, like I said, that's always been my primary interest. Everything else just sort of revolves around that. And in my view, that's the main crux of what I'm interested in, and what I feel is one of the main things that the Casebook can provide is that library of contemporary press reports. I got interested in it the way most people do. They go to their local library, and if it's a fairly good-sized library, like most in America, they're going to have the New York Times on microfilm and the London Times on microfilm. And it goes all the way back to the 19th century. And so, of course, I went through those and printed them out and transcribed them and put them on the Casebook back in the early days. And, folks were, especially for the London Times, which was, a paper that, although it's widely available, a lot of folks had only seen snippets of it when it was quoted in Ripper books that had been published. And so, a lot of folks were saying it was very useful to see it in complete context and to be able to search it by keyword and just have it all available there without necessarily having to travel to the library or going to the UK to get these press reports in person. And of course, that was great for me. I thought, this is a great idea for a project. This is something extremely useful that we could do. And so I pursued it myself for a few years. Fortunately, I was at university at the time, and our collections there had a couple of the UK dailies were available. So I did a lot of transcribing there in my sophomore and junior years, and eventually, luckily, got into contact with Adrian Vipers, who a lot of you know or knew. His screen name was Viper, but he was a UK-based researcher and a really, really nice guy who also shared this passion for the contemporary newspapers and other things. He wrote many articles about the case in general, but he had a passion for the newspapers that surpassed my own even, and he would go to the UK archives and he had access to almost any newspaper at the time, and he would print them out, and he would transcribe them extremely, very, very carefully, and he would go over them 3 or 4 times to make sure there wasn't a single typo anywhere, which I'm ashamed to admit I never did. And so he would send those over, and the project started to grow, and his enthusiasm, he would talk about the project with other people. He actually got other volunteers to sign up and and help him out. So after a while, he would go out and collect the transcriptions and make the photocopies. And he would send the photocopies off to the four corners of the globe to all these various volunteers, and who then in their spare time they would transcribe all these press reports and then email them back to him, and he would check them for typos and everything. And then once everything was good, he'd send it off to me to be put on the site. And so we did this for years and years, and until eventually, as most of you know, Adrian did pass away several years ago. And so that aspect of the project sort of went away, but in part for my own interest and in part to sort of honor what he really got going, we do keep it going today. Every 2 years or so, I buy a new couple of rolls of microfilm from overseas, and we go through. I have a machine here, and I make the copies of all the press reports, and I send it off to folks who are interested in volunteering to transcribe. And so we continue it even to this day, and I think, I don't have it in front of me, but we have something on the order of 5,500 to around 6,000 individual press reports transcribed, indexed by subject, and available on the casebook today.
Isn't it interesting that... sorry, I was just going to say that it's not a question, more of a comment. And isn't it interesting that at the time where the internet is being blamed for the death of the daily newspaper and the Sunday newspaper, you have a case like the Jack the Ripper murders, and its existence on the internet has aided so much just by the preservation of these same newspapers that are now, the people are wanting to expound the death knell for just because of the internet. It's irony. Andy, you were going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, Stephen, that's a very, very important database that we have and that we're building there. I really believe that with digital archives becoming available of more and more newspapers, that's going to be the source of a lot of, quote, new information in the years to come. And I realize, that you can't... Newspapers are not 100% reliable, but still, you can find things out that we never knew before. Like, for example, the MP Farquharson. That bit of information came about just from looking through digital databases. Yep. So the more we can have of that, the better.
Yeah, well, hopefully it seems to be the case. Hopefully, more and more newspapers will go digital for their archives and be available through keyword search, which was amazing. This is the sort of thing. It's a huge time saver in terms of going through the microfilm, screen by screen, and just scanning it. It's the possibilities are really endless.
Yeah, Stephen, you said something earlier too that I wanted to pick up on. You made a comment that we know maybe 5% of what the principals knew at the time. I think that's important for us to remember. Is that we like to think of ourselves as being very sophisticated and having all this knowledge, but really, in terms of raw facts, we don't know. We know a small fraction of what was known at the time, and it's a big hunt to try to find out what they knew as much as we can.
Yeah, that's true. Any kind of history, really, not just Jack the Ripper, but any sort of history where you're going back 100 or 150 years. It's easy to say, well, we've got all this information, we've got thousands and thousands of press reports and books, and look at all the facts we have. But when you really look at it and you really pare it all down, in any historical approach, what we know versus what we think we know is there's a wide gap between the two.
If I can just follow up on that point a bit, Stephen, because you played a large role here in dragging the Ripper case into the 21st century by using the internet, as a way that we look differently now at historical crimes and indeed history itself. Because it's no longer a subject for textbooks, but a dynamic, new way of looking at history for a new generation. What do you think about that? Like the internet's role, from a historical perspective.
I hope it brings more people into it. I think before the internet, I think it was very much sort of a closed atmosphere. It was if you weren't in the UK, it was damn near impossible to write a Jack the Ripper book, and an actual factual Jack the Ripper book with source material, unless you were traveling back and forth several times a year. And so the internet makes a lot of that information, not all of it, unfortunately, but a lot of that it makes it available no matter where you are in the world. And so for Jack the Ripper and for any number of other subjects, I think it's opened the door for people who had an interest in the case and might not have been financially able or for whatever other reason able to travel for research. I think it's really opened the door for folks like that to really get published and get their ideas out there.
And Mike Hovell and Hull, why don't you chime in here?
Hi, Stephen. How can listeners to the podcast help out with the Casebook Press project?
Well, we're always looking for volunteers, first off, and volunteers can help out by transcribing articles that have already been photocopied, but anyone who has access to an archive, it's equally important that we go out there and get new photocopies and new images of articles. And of course, online archives are also extremely useful. So anyone who has an interest could certainly just contact me, drop me an email, and I'll sort of give you an update on what we're doing on the press reports. And if you have an idea or an area that you'd like to focus on, certainly we could talk it over and see if there's a place on the casebook for it.
And Paul Begg in Kent in the UK, we have you on today, so why don't you chime in here?
Yeah, I just think that of the casebook overall, the most important aspect is, from my point of view, are the press reports, and I think there's an incredible amount of new information, not necessarily big stuff, but small pieces of information here and there, which has just been amazing. And I'd also like to point out that it just doesn't do the press reports, but there are transcripts of various book sources as well, like Anderson and McNaughton and the usual ones, and also documents as well. So all of that information is being made available on the casebook to anybody who wants to look for it, and it's all that much is incredible, and that's something that I think particularly anybody new to the subject who wasn't around, say, 25 years ago, the amount of information that's been made available by people like Stephen and in the various journals and so forth is tremendous. It's utterly fantastic.
I agree, and gems can be discovered or rediscovered in the press projects every day. And just to give an example, a couple days ago, the researcher A.P. Wolf came out with something that he found on the Casebook Press project concerning a man who sold wigs and disguises. And in this article that he pulled up, this gentleman who ran this wig shop and who admits to selling disguises claimed that one of the gentlemen he sold disguises to was followed by Scotland Yard to New York City. And that's something I certainly had never heard of before. But again, it was something that someone had transcribed for the press project that was up on the Casebook website, and it just took to searching to rediscover and bring back up this just another aspect of the case that could be unknown to even someone who's been around the case for a long time, not just a newbie to the case. So
Right.
It is a
and you can do that, but you can also make comparisons between various news reports. And you get various, it's minor details of no great interest to anybody else, but you can pull out those kind of little tiny points where you can see conflicts between stories. You can start to pull out, well, that was a press agency story, and so that's one that went to a whole load of newspapers, but here's another one where quite obviously a journalist was there and on the street and went and interviewed somebody personally. And so you get a variation on the story there. So people have been witnesses tell the same story to 3 or 4 different journalists, and there are little tiny variations, additions, omissions, and so forth between these stories. And that kind of comparison stuff is extremely valuable as well.
Right. I have an open question for anybody. AP Wolf is going to be running a forum on JTR forums, and he might even do it on Casebook when the Old Bailey transcripts become available. What does everyone think about that, and the possibility that we may find, conceivably 10 to 20 new suspects within those transcripts? Stephen?
Be fascinating. It'd be great.
Well, I was going to let someone else talk.
Paul, let's hear your opinion on the Old Bailey transcripts being made available online.
It's one of those awful things where you begin to feel that you're extremely old. I don't know. I have no idea what's going to be in those Old Bailey transcripts, and when we've got them and we can look at them, that'll be fantastic. Maybe there'll be something there. Maybe there won't be, but. Who can say? I would feel that, in all probability, that anybody who's cropping up in the Old Bailey we would know about anyway from the newspaper database that exists. But we get further details. Maybe people will assume an importance that they didn't have before. Who knows? I mean, you just really don't know, do you? You can't forecast these things at all. It's a very exciting idea. I just hope that AP gets it, and let's see it soon.
Yeah.
And Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, changing tacks here. A few years ago, Stephen, you acquired a group of objects from the Mitre Public House in Whitechapel Road. And among these objects was a plate of hair allegedly belonging to Catherine Eddowes. And you sent it to a man named Ian Findlay, an Australian pathologist who developed a new DNA technique. Now, can you tell us about all of that for those people who are unfamiliar with it?
Sure. I guess by now it would have been about 3 or 4 years ago that I was contacted by a fellow who said he had some Ripper items that he would he had no idea if they were real or not, if they were a joke, but he would like to send photographs or possibly send them over and have quote unquote expert look at them and give an opinion on it. And among these were I think 2 copies of the Illustrated Police News, which to me they didn't look original. They looked like the 1970s reprints. There was a 19th century telegram that was handwritten, and I don't remember the exact words, but it was something to the effect of Catherine Eddowes' body discovered, send police, post haste, etc. And along with that, there was also a bizarre BBC contract about some kind of a 1920s radio show about George Chapman. And finally, there was a lock of hair that was said to have been taken from the body of Catherine Eddowes. He sent me photographs of them, and I wasn't really bowled over, especially the fact that the newspapers were 1970s, and the telegram was sort of the obvious one, because it was fairly obvious to me, at least, that the original text that was on the telegram, which I think the actual paper was 19th century. But the original text was sort of scratched or erased out, and this new text was written on top of it. And so, it looked like a forgery or something someone was just doing for fun. And, if this really was being displayed at the Mitre pub, then that's certainly not outside the realm of possibility that someone just did it for fun to put something on the wall of interest to get tourists in. And the long and short of it is that's generally my call and everyone else's call who's ever seen it. I sent the BBC contract to Andy Aliff, who used to work at the BBC, and he did some research for it and said, no, the BBC contract is actually a fake, and there's no sign of any show that was being referred to in it. And of course, the lock of hair is what most people are interested in, and for me personally, I I didn't think that it was the real deal, but obviously, the guy sent it to me, and I figured I'd see what I could do in terms of getting it tested. And just by absolute luck, timing-wise, I was reading an article just probably weeks after I received the package from this fellow, and it was about this guy Ian Finlay over in Australia, and he had gotten DNA out of a 150 or 140 year old lock of hair, which was the first time anyone had been able to do anything of the sort with material of that age. And so, of course, I had this 120 supposedly year old lock of hair in my closet, and I said, well, what the heck, I'll see if I can find this guy. And I wrote to him, and he wrote back and said he was definitely interested in testing it free of charge. And so I packaged it off and sent it off to him. And the results, he found no DNA on it, possibly because the hair was cut and not plucked. Usually the DNA that you find in hair is actually plucked whole, so it still has the follicle in it, and that's usually where you find the DNA. So that might have been part of it, or it might have just been too old or whatnot. But he couldn't even confirm that the hair was human. So we don't know that it was Catherine Eddowes. We don't even know that it was a person's hair. It could have been a horse's mane or who knows what. So that was sort of the long and the short of it. I never really held out much hope for it, but it got a little bit of press coverage at the time that, Catherine Eddowes' lock of hair is being tested for DNA, but it never really went anywhere, and my opinion is it's still a hoax. Sure.
And as a follow-up to that, if DNA had been extracted, I mean, we do have living relatives of Catherine Eddowes as found by Neil Sheldon.
Right, and that's actually what we did. I neglected to mention that part. I did get in touch with Neil because at this time he had just very recently gotten in touch with the descendants of the Eddowes family, and I think one or two members of the family did agree to provide swabs of DNA, and those were sent off to Ian Finlay in Australia as well, separately. But unfortunately, since no DNA was found, it was worthless in that respect. There was nothing to compare it to.
Right, like nothing came of this, but in your opinion, can modern forensics help, not necessarily solve this case, but deal with certain aspects of the case, do you think, ever at some point in the future? Do you think that's a viable possibility?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't rule anything out, but it would be very difficult for me to think of anything that we have today, apart from the Ripper letters, obviously, which could contain some form of DNA. The bloody fragment of apron that allegedly is from Catherine Eddowes. I suppose that could be tested, and if we ever found any other remnants of the case, certainly those could be tested as well. But the materials that we have at our disposal today, really, there's just not a whole lot that connected to the victims themselves.
Stephen, I wanted to ask you a question about the Crawford letter. You did some research. You wrote an article about that. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us something about how you found it and what it is, and particularly your conjecture about which Emily Druitt might have been the subject of that letter?
Sure. This was, 5, maybe 6 years ago.
2001, I think it was.
Was it 2001? Okay, so 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Periodically, what I go through all the various online databases because more and more libraries are getting their materials not necessarily digitized, but at least cataloged online. And I'm always looking for material that's new or that no one's ever heard of before. And I guess around 2001, I found a pretty sizable collection of papers and memorabilia from the Anderson family that was located in all places, Duke University, here on the eastern coast of the United States. And I'm in Virginia, so it's only about 4-hour drive for me. And I called up Judy Stock, who's a friend of mine, also in Virginia, and asked her if she's interested in taking a little field trip down there to take a look at all these papers, and she was, and so we set up a trip. It was probably the summer of 2001, because I know it was hot as hell when we got there, and so we went in, and this was back in the day. So I brought my big clunky 2001 era laptop and my big clunky 2001 era scanner with me, and I was loaded down with all this equipment, and we made it in, got into the rare books room, and I think we spent all of the first day and about a half of the second day going through the papers, and it was an amazing collection. It was actually purchased by Duke University in the 1980s, I think, from an institution or a bookseller in Ireland. And they bought it mostly for the religious aspect of, Anderson was something of a religious scholar, and that's mainly why they purchased it. And a lot of it was family letters. There were letters going as far back as the 18th century from Anderson's father, I think, if I remember correctly, and going all the way up into the early 20th century. And so there was a lot of interesting information there. There wasn't a whole lot actually on Anderson's Anderson's police work, unfortunately. It was mostly his missionary work earlier on, I think in the 1870s and 1860s. And there was a lot of material later on, especially I think one of his sons died either in World War I or just previous to World War I in a shipwreck. And there was a lot of material then. But in the period that we were interested in, obviously 1888, 1889, and the surrounding years, there wasn't a whole lot. There were a few letters, and a few. There was an invitation to a party in October of 1888, and then there was this thing, the Crawford letter, which I'm going off memory here. If I recall, there was no specific date on it, but it was stored in a folder that was containing 1888 and 1889 material. And a few years past that, obviously, into the 1890s as well. But the letter was interesting. It was just a single sheet of paper, I believe, on two sides, and it was signed Crawford. And the basic gist of the letter was that it was a letter of introduction. He was introducing this woman to Anderson. And he said, I can't verify if this woman's story is true, but she has, or she thinks she has, some kind of knowledge about the Whitechapel murder and believes she may be nearly related to him. Please, listen to her story and make up your own opinion was the basic gist of the letter. And of course, that's interesting because, first of all, it's a Jack the Ripper related letter here in America that, as far as I had known at the time, and I think that's still the case, it had never been known about before. And obviously, it had it sort of had the Truett ring to it of the whole story of private information, believing that a family member might have committed the murders. And so, we went through the rest of the collection, and we didn't really find anything else that was Jack the Ripper related at all. We did find some new photographs of Anderson and his family, which were interesting. And I believe those were published as well with the original article. But it was the Crawford letter that was the main discovery. And I started doing research on Crawford, who was the 26th or 27th Earl of Crawford. I forgot the exact number. But his name was, I forgot.
I've got your article in front of me. James Ludwig Lindsay.
Right. Lindsay.
Yeah.
And so I started doing research on him and found really there's not really a biography of him, but there was a book about the Lindsay collection, and it turns out he was an avid bibliographer and a collector of books, and there was a lot of biography about him in this particular book, though it was mainly just a catalog of the various works he had collected. And one of the names that came up again and again and again was Bernard Quaritch, who many of you will know is a famed book dealer of the 19th century, and he was one of his primary customers at the time was Lindsay, who bought just absolute reams and reams of books from him. And so, I thought that was interesting, and, I read through the book, but I didn't really get anything that I thought at the time was useful until later on. I was searching book catalogs once again, and I thought I'd see if any hits came up for Druitt, and around this time of late 19th century, and of course I came up with a couple of books that were actually very, very high quality artistic reprints of the works of William Blake, and they were published and sort of more than just published. Quaritch himself was actually involved in the production of these reprints, and one of the names that was involved, one of the artists who worked on this series of books was Emily Druitt. And so, as a lot of folks in this Ripper community will do, they'll put one and one together and make 12. And so I said, wow, we got Druitt, we've got Lindsay, we've got this guy Quaritch between them. Well, maybe it was Quaritch who got Emily Druitt in touch with Lindsay, and maybe it was Emily who thought, well, maybe someone related to me, i.e. Montague Druitt, could have been the Ripper. So it was a stretch, but I thought it was interesting enough to write an article about it, and so I did. And published everything that I had found up to that point, leaving it open at the end as to whether or not this is actually a verifiable connection. But some months afterwards, I actually found additional material on Emily Druitt, and there were actually two Emily Druitts, one who was related to Montague and was his cousin, and another who was related to Jabez, Jabez. I'm not sure how to pronounce that name. Jabez
I've always
Druitt.
said Jabez. I don't know.
And that Druitt, that side of the family, is actually completely separate from Montague, as far as I could tell at the time. And so, it's interesting to me. I think it's still possible that there's a Druitt connection with that letter, but certainly, if you consider the absolute hysteria that was going on at the time, and how many people were saying, well, I think I know who Jack the Ripper was, it's not outside the bounds of reason that more than just one person thought one of their relatives was Jack the Ripper. So,
if I could just follow up, how did you find out that it was the Emily who was the daughter of Jabez? How did you verify that?
That was in an article that was published fairly recently, actually, in an art journal of some sort. I forgot the name, but it had 2 or 3 sentences about Emily Druitt, and included some of her family members' names in the article. And so I used those. I looked them up in a Druitt genealogy book that I had access to, which is actually it's huge. I think it's a genealogy book about the Mayo family, but it contains a lot of interesting information, including a photograph of Robert Druitt on the Druitt family. And I looked it up in there and found Jabez was very far removed from the Montague side of the family.
You know that he lived in Mile End Road, though, in the East End.
Yeah, he did live in the East End, not quite Whitechapel, but in the area.
And you know that there are a couple of letters written by Jabez and his wife to one of the daughters of Robert Druitt. These letters are in the West Sussex Record Office in Chichester. Don't know the contents, but they're dated 1888 and 1889. So even though it may be a distant familial relationship, there was correspondence between Jabez Druitt and Robert Druitt's family in that period. We know that.
Right, and the exact words in the Crawford letter were sort of vague, but they were that she thinks he is nearly related, in quotes, nearly related. And
well, one could take that 2 ways. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that could be cousin or I wouldn't say brother, but aunt, cousin, nephew. But you could also say nearly related means not quite related, but somewhat related.
Right. Yeah.
So there's wiggle room in there, and I'm sure if someone wants to, they can make that argument. for me, I don't have enough information to say really who's being talked about in that letter, but I certainly think it's interesting and worth looking into.
Yeah,
But I'm sorry, it was in a folder of material from 1888, 1899, that era?
I'm probably being more specific than it actually was. I'm going from memory, but it was a folder from the late 1880s into the 1890s.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen.
Stephen, one question. Andy brought up the Earl of Crawford, and you elaborated just now. Did you know, well, I'm sure you did, that the Earl of Crawford was suspected of having been the author of the December 1st Pall Mall Gazette article, One Who Thinks He Knows, that we now know that Robert Stevenson wrote.
Right.
And that he was, ostensibly, he was an occultist. Is this the one in the same Earl of Crawford?
Right. I did research that line of inquiry, and if I recall, the Earl of Crawford actually wasn't an occultist. That was sort of a canard, but he did collect occult books as part of his book collection. He had a wide variety of interests, and that was one of them. So, to call him an occultist based on that, I'm not sure if we can, but I think that's where the story came from.
Okay, it's interesting to see that Druid and Stevenson possible connection there. Perhaps not directly, but indirectly.
Sure. Yeah.
Paul Begg in Kent, I'd like you to get some more words in here on this show.
Yeah, I was just interested, really, in asking Stephen now what his current interest in the Ripper. Does the casebook basically run itself now, or what active involvement do you have in pursuit of this subject?
Well, I would say my involvement in the site and in Jack the Ripper as a whole sort of comes and goes. Over 12 years, there have been periods where I've worked on it, 5 hours a day or 8 hours a day nonstop. And there have been times when I didn't make time for it, and I just sort of let the forum go on its own and let things just sort of continue. I mean, I would do occasional work on it, but it wouldn't be a daily regimen. And I would say probably in the past year or so, that has been the case. I've not really had a whole lot of time just for personal issues and other projects that have come up. But I have gotten back into it over the past month or two. In terms of where the casebook is going and what my new projects are, one of the projects that I'm hoping to sort of get off the ground is the casebook blogging format, which is something I set up earlier in the year. Unfortunately, it suffered through the crash. One of my servers crashed in February, and we lost everything before it could be backed up in terms of the blogging. But we've gotten it back up, and we do have a few bloggers now, including Mike Covell, who's on the call right now. And I think that's going to be one of the more interesting areas of the site, because unlike the forums where it's in many ways it's something of a free-for-all where everyone can share their opinion, but also everyone can sort of be as nasty as they want to be, and that kind of turns some folks off. But I think a blog is going to be appealing to folks who want to participate in the community and they want to share their research, but they don't necessarily want to get involved in all the petty BS that sometimes takes place on the forums. And so on a blog, for those who aren't familiar with the term, the individual owner of the blog it's essentially their own miniature website, and they control all the content. They can add new posts, images, videos, whatever they want, categorize it and everything. And folks can comment on each blog entry just as they can comment and add comments on a forum. But the difference is that the blog owner actually has complete control over the site. So Mike, for example, if he makes a post on Donston and someone comes up and says, no, this is complete bollocks, it's not even worth reading, he can say, all right, well, that's not going to be published, that's not going to get us anywhere. And he can control the comments that are allowed through, and he can sort of really direct the conversation towards the specific subject that interests him, instead of just having a forum where it's a free-for-all, and generally the loudest people and the most obnoxious people sometimes are the ones who direct the conversation. So that's the hope, at least. I mean, the blogs are still very new, and we've got about 6 or 7 people signed up. And actually, I would invite everyone who's on this call and folks who are listening to the podcast, if you're interested in setting up a blog, please contact me. We're just getting it started, but I'm definitely interested in having anyone who has an interest in the Ripper case getting signed up with their own blog. So that's one of the main projects that I'm working on right now for the casebook, apart from just the everyday business of keeping it updated, putting up the latest articles, the latest press reports, book reviews, that sort of thing.
I have a question along those lines, Stephen. How much do you think the message boards, I mean, your blog idea is a really good idea because it allows the blogger to edit and kind of it's like you said, it's like Howard on his side has individual forums. It's kind of like the same kind of thing where the blogger is able to edit their own blog in the comments that are contained in there. How much do you think that the message boards are a help or a hindrance to Jack the Ripper research? Because if a hypothetical case arose, so where with the Old Bailey transcripts, if they came about and someone started naming cases of unknown local East Enders with a history of violence, names that we have never heard before, they may get scant attention on a message board and just may, fall into the ether. And it may hinder research, just by it seems that the message boards get the most attention are the ones that contain theories about currently named suspects. So I was wondering your opinion on do you think that message boards in and of themselves are more of a help or a hindrance to researching the case?
I think they're much more of a help than they are a hindrance. I think the only way that they're a hindrance really is if you allow it to be, and if you sort of get sucked into it and get involved in sort of the petty squabbles that go along, unfortunately, with most online conversations in that format. I think, it's definitely the case that useful and interesting nuggets of information get posted and then get ignored, unfortunately, because it's the loud and sexy conversations about Maybrick and Donston and all the suspects and whatnot, and all the various theories that are going on, that they get the most attention because that's what most people are interested in. But I wouldn't say that that's a hindrance. I mean, if it's posted out there and it's available, even if it's sort of hidden away, it is available out there. And if someone 5-10 years from now is interested in Jack Spratt, who was arrested in 1889, and they do a keyword search, that post is going to come up. That post might be 6 years old and it might have had no comments, but it's going to be just as useful today as it would have been 6 years ago to that guy who was interested in that exact subject. So,
and I agree with you. I agree with you on that, Stephen, because as a researcher myself, and Mike can probably concur with this, is that we use repositories like the Casebook quite a bit, and it's fairly easy to cut through the BS and the personal opinion. And when you're just looking at a fact or an alleged fact, and you can actually go and take that little nugget of information and do further research on it. And I found it, more useful. Definitely not a hindrance.
Great. Well, that's good to know. And it's just not my opinion.
And Mike Covell, you had something to add here?
Yeah, definitely. Stephen, have you ever actually been tempted to join in on the debate on the forums, or do you just leave it up to the members?
I generally haven't. Over the past, the site's almost been around just over 12 years. There are times when I get involved in the forums and I'll make a post every now and again, but no, I don't get involved in most of the debates that go on. First, because I have very particular interests in the case, and a lot of it doesn't really center for me around who Jack the Ripper was. I'm interested much more in sort of the time, the place, and the general society that this was taking place in. But also, just from the standpoint of running the casebook, the most important thing for me is that someone can come to the casebook and know that the information that they're getting from the press reports or from some of the articles and suspect overviews is that it's not being written by a guy who has a horse in the race, so to speak. I don't want to make my personal opinions sort of known for in the sense that I don't want people to come to the site and for example, if they'll say, well, I don't think Donston Stevenson was the Ripper. I think he's the worst suspect in the world. And I don't want someone who thinks Donston what possibly could have been the Ripper to come to the site and say, well, this is useless because the guy who runs the site has preconceived notions about certain aspects of the case, and who knows how that has affected the content that's been in, or content. Maybe someone gave him an article that didn't jibe with his personal theories, and maybe he didn't post it for that reason. So I try to keep my own ideas and my own theories about the case, though I have very few of them, obviously. I try to keep them to myself. If someone asks me about it, sure, I'll answer it, but I don't actively get involved in those discussions.
Will we ever see a blog then, by yourself?
Actually, yeah. I'm thinking of doing one, but it won't be really my thoughts on the case so much as I'm hoping to use it as sort of a sounding board, just to, this is new on the site, or this was posted 5 days ago, and I think this is interesting, and here's why. Or, if there's just anything that's Ripper related in the news that strikes my interest. It's not going to be comprehensive because the Ripperologist and Ripper Notes and a lot of other places handle that much better than I could. But yeah, I think I probably will do a blog of my own, and we'll see how it goes.
And Stephen, like the casebook, when anyone does a search on Google or any other search engine on the Ripper, your site is the first one that comes up, and I think because of that, media and individuals, you must get a lot of strange, unusual, unique requests from the public at large. Could you tell us about a few, maybe?
Yeah, the single email that I get most often, and I'd get it at least probably 3 or 4 times a day, is, I have a Jack the Ripper paper, it's due tomorrow, please can you send me something? And it's always the same exact email, and I don't respond to them anymore. It's kind of funny, but yeah, sure. I mean, I get emails from people who have new theories and they want to share them and they want to get my opinion on them, and usually they walk away unhappy when they do get my opinion. But I get emails from people who genuinely have new and exciting information to share. Which is always great, and I do get inquiries from the media about whenever Jack the Ripper's in the news, they want to get a soundbite, or they want to get a few sentences in an article, or someone on video to respond to some questions.
Howard, do you have something to add to this conversation here?
Sure. Okay. All right, Stephen, since we're talking about suspects here.
In case you guys heard ringing noises in the background, it's because we've lost Paul Begg, and I'm making an attempt to add him back in, because I wanted him to comment on the whole conversation that was going about the usefulness of message boards, since he's one of the few published authors who are prominent in the case to participate in the message boards. So anyway, go ahead, Howard.
Okay. All right. Relative to the press coverage and the newspaper reports that you're pretty famous for, let me ask you a question, Stephen. Do you think that some of the reason that the press coverage seemed to dwindle after the Mary Kelly murder had a lot to do with the resignation of Charles Warren? In other words, did the press use the Whitechapel murders to help get rid of Warren, or at least try prior to his resignation?
I think that could certainly be part of it. Obviously, a lot of newspapers at the time covered the Jack the Ripper sort of through the lens of either being a radical or conservative paper. And a lot of that was, are you pro-Warren or are you anti-Warren? So, yeah, going through the papers, obviously you get that sort of bent depending on what paper you're reading. But if I had to sort of put the blame on one thing, I would say it was, I'm awful at names, and I'm sort of making it obvious why I created the casebook, because I need sort of a handy reference guide. But it was the famous case in there was the Times witness was assassinated, or gosh, if Paul was on, he would know the
Paul
name
is
of the
on.
case.
Paul, are you there?
Yeah, I've literally just got back. Yes.
Okay, Paul, what was the famous case that sort of it started before November, but it was it sort of exploded in the press in November of 1888 about the Times witness, the Parnell Commission. That was it.
Oh, the Parnell Commission, right? Yes,
right.
Yes,
And the Parnell Commission isn't something that's really written a lot about in most Ripper books. But if you go through the press reports in around November of 1888, around the time of the Mary Kelly case, there was actually more coverage of the Parnell Commission than there was about Jack the Ripper in general. Even in the papers that were, making their bread and butter on the Jack the Ripper case, the Parnell Commission and the whole sort of buzz around that, surrounding that case, was huge at the time. And so, my opinion for a long time has been that the not necessarily the cessation, but the case was less sensationalized after Mary Kelly than it was, after the double event or after Chapman. Partially, I think, just because of lack of space. So many pages of newsprint were devoted to the Parnell Commission at that time that I think the focus of the press, like it does today, when it gets a new big story, it just almost 100% shifts to that, regardless of what else is going on.
And he was a major politician at the time, Parnell, so, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just literally like having a major politician in a scandal case now would virtually swamp anything else, so it did back then with Parnell.
And Paul, since we have you back on, I was going to ask you, we were discussing about the time you dropped off, the usefulness of message boards as research tools. Would you recommend a researcher who, let's say, discovers an interesting letter, or believes they have some kind of a breakthrough in the case? Would you encourage them to post this on a message board, or to get feedback from the Ripperology community, or would you recommend that they go in some other route to get their opinions heard? Because go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I think that it's massively important these days that there are these outlets, there are the journals, there are the message boards, and yes, I think that's the way it should go. I think one of the original thoughts behind Nick Warren when he launched Ripperana all those years ago was that these snippets of information, not full-blooded, full-blown articles, but these snippets of new discoveries had some sort of place where they could be placed, and to a great extent, places like the Casebook and things like that have supplanted the magazines in that respect. So yes, I think things should go on the message boards, and one of the reasons why I don't like message boards when they become dominated by a particular point of view, as has happened in the past in the case of particularly and most notoriously the Diary, where it gets swamped by a individual or a group of individuals. It stops people coming forward, because sometimes people are made to look foolish, and of course nobody wants to do that when they're just trying to do share some thoughts or some information that that is theirs. They don't want to be held up to mockery or anything like that. So yes, I think that it's very important that people do share these pieces of information and solicit comment and observation. And for the most part, people are generally very supportive. I think it's not that common actually that you have people subjected to rudeness and being put down.
Right. And Mike Covell in Hull, would you like to chime in here? You wanted to ask a question about the Ripper from Hull letter.
Yeah, that's right. Just to inform you, hopefully it will be in the next issue of Ripperology. Ripperologist, sorry. recently, while I was going through all the old press reports in Hull, what I discovered for the period was that because Hull was quite a large port during the 1800s, we actually had our own reporters down in London. So we got quite a lot of stories that were unpublished anywhere else. One such story was actually a local story of the Hull Times, where a young boy had gone into the offices and left a Ripper letter. Now they published the Ripper letter in the paper, and I've got a full transcript. Unfortunately, it appears that the original has been lost over the years. The only place that might have it is the East Riding Archives, which is out in Beverley, and they're still looking through their collections to see if they might have it. But for me, it shows the importance of the press at the time. I mean, this Ripper letter's never been seen before. I will send it to you all so you can have a read through and have a look at the text, and it's quite interesting as well because it actually rhymes. That the writer's gone to a great length to make it rhyme. It's quite an interesting piece actually, but it just goes to show that there are still some little snippets out there in the press that shed new light and give us new information on the case.
And didn't the press report that this letter had a bloody dagger drawn on it or something like that, Mike?
It did, yeah. The author of the actual piece stated that there was a dagger drawn on the letter, and the dagger was dripping with blood, and it was written in pencil as well.
And Mike's done a lot of work in the whole archives and press reports from Hull, and if they're not already up on Casebook as press product, I'm sure they will be here in the near future, right, Mike?
Definitely, yeah. There's a lot to go through, but that is one thing that will be getting done at some point.
And Andy Spalek, we're running up towards an hour here. Howard was keeping time for us.
Okay. We're at 75 minutes.
75 minutes. Okay, let's go through once more. And anyone else have any questions or comments or anything to bring up? Well, we have Stephen here with us today.
Yeah, I wanted to ask.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
You go ahead, Andy, and we'll get back.
Yeah, go on, Andy.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the Casebook forums and the community really that it's become, and I think it is just that. It's a community, and I've gotten to know some marvelous people on the Casebook, and been able to have the opportunity to come over to London a few times and to meet some of those people, and even to meet and rub elbows with some known people. Almost got to meet Paul last time I was there, but we got our dates mixed up a little. But it's just a neat thing to be able to have that kind of a community. And
there's always the next time, Andy.
Yeah. What's that?
There's always the next time.
There's always the next time. Hopefully this summer I'll be there.
Yeah, well, good.
But,
good.
Yeah.
We'll do it then. We'll make an extra special effort to try and cross each other's paths.
Yeah.
And Mike in Hull?
Yeah, finally from me, Stephen. If there was no such field as Ripperology, what would you be doing?
I'm not sure. I've got other sort of side projects that I work on, including mostly puzzle websites are kind of a hobby fascination of mine, so I'd probably be working more on that. And, I don't know. If it wasn't Jack the Ripper, I probably would be writing about something else that I posted on back in 1996, and someone found it interesting, and I got obsessed with that. I guess I have the collector's obsessive personality, I guess, so that's part of what drives the Casebook, is just trying to collect more and more information and putting it all together. So if it wasn't Jack the Ripper, I'm sure it would be something else, who knows what. But I have a wide variety of interests, and I'm sure something would have come up.
Are there any other murder cases that you're really interested in on top of Jack the Ripper?
No, actually, I'm not really all that interested in true crime unless it has some kind of relation to the Jack the Ripper case. As I mentioned before, my interest in Jack the Ripper is not so much the crime aspect of it as it is sort of the social aspect of it. I'm really fascinated by the times and the place, and just sort of learning about how the people lived and how the murders affected them, and did it improve their lives? Did it make it worse? Did it usher in any kind of wide sweeping social changes at the end of the 19th century? And so these are the questions that really sort of interest me the most, and usually sort of make the people I'm talking to start to yawn and fall asleep. But
it is one of those interesting things, though, that maddens me, is that we don't actually know anything about the way in which the murders affected people. How did Joseph Barnett live the rest of his life? Did he wake up and have nightmares? If I hadn't have deserted Mary Jane, would she'd still be alive? We don't know any of those sort of things. None of those memories seem to have passed down through the family. We can guess,
that's
obviously,
true.
how he would have felt, but all of
it's easy to forget that these were real people, not just the victims, but the people who were tangentially involved in the case. And it's not that they just came into existence in 1888 and then disappeared in 1889. They had lives before and after, and it's very sort of it's interesting to sort of think about. Was this really that big of a deal to them? We think of Jack the Ripper as, wow, this was the defining moment of that time period. But, back then, maybe this was just one small aspect of their lives that they really didn't think much of and didn't really talk to their families about. Or, on the other hand, there could be a rich oral history in several of these families that we haven't found yet.
One just hopes that there is somewhere. It would be nice, it would be lovely to find this information, even though it's probably something that we would think, well, yep, that's exactly how they would have responded, but it's all out there, and or one would hope that it's all out there. In some cases, perhaps it's just now too late. If only Dan Fast and Tom Cullen and people like that had actually gone looking for that information, they may well have come across people who were then alive, far nearer to the events than we are. It's possibly too late now.
Yeah, I always regretted the fact that Leonard Matters in 1928 didn't do that.
Well, exactly. I mean,
great opportunity.
And he elected not to. I mean, that's
Yes.
the awful thing is that he decided that it was that so many of those stories had been corrupted over the time that it was best not to do that. And isn't that sad? You'd kill for those corrupted stories now.
Though somewhere there's probably in some newspaper or some periodical, there's probably some of those stories that are yet to be discovered. I just bet there are some.
Oh, I'm. It's difficult to think that it's escaped, isn't it? You have these people so close to the crimes, and surely some journalist somewhere would have just recognised that there was a meritable story there somewhere along the lines and recorded it. But maybe it's just it's just out there. We just hope that it'll be found one day.
Well, and since the centenary, it's amazing how much new information has come to the public knowledge now that we never used to have before 1988.
It absolutely is, but the frightening thought is that just how much information is out there that hasn't come to light, because people don't think it would be of any interest, and that's the thing that scares me. What worries me is that you've got all these people who maybe are now inheriting grandfather's or great-grandfather's photograph collection, where there's a photograph of Uncle George standing in Dorset Street, and of course they think, it's not of any interest to anybody, whereas we may not be interested to in the photograph of Uncle George, but we'd be really interested in that picture of Dorset Street that's behind him in that photograph, and it's all that stuff, and it's just not being made available. You'd have thought that as a result of the centenary that and all the books and the publicity and the movies and things, that those people who have got these things would have been coming forward, but they don't appear to be. You have to go chasing them down and hunting them down. Neil Sheldon's shown that. I mean, look at the relatives that he's come across and the photographs and everything else. But he went to them; they didn't go to him.
Well, yeah, and so many of them were not aware of their own genealogy.
Yeah, but there's going to be all of this. Why haven't Joseph Barnett's descendants turned up and said, look, this is what I remember being told, and this is a photograph of him, and they must be out there. Look at all the people who are associated with the Ripper crimes, and how very, very few of their descendants are known to us and have come forward.
That's a good point.
Alrighty, well, we've gone quite a bit over an hour, so I'll wrap this up. You've been listening to Rippercast, Episode 8, The Medium is the Message, with our very special guest, Stephen Ryder. I'm glad you were here with us today, Stephen.
Glad to be here, thank you.
And also joining us was Paul Begg from Kent in the UK, and hopefully, Paul, you can come on the podcast as an interviewee next time.
Love to, absolutely.
Well, we thank you very much. And Andy Spalek came to us from St. Louis.
Pleasure to be here.
A pleasure to have you also. And we are going to go down with Mike Covell in the Holt in the UK.
It's always a pleasure, guys. Thank you.
Always a pleasure having you on. And Robert McLaughlin in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Thanks for being on again.
Hey, you bet. It's great to be here as always, guys.
And thanks for all your work that you put in for this podcast. It wouldn't happen without you, believe me. And Howard Brown in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Great show today. An honor to be here.